Hello and welcome everyone to our weekly session titled Latest in Bitcoin Tech, where we go through the Bitcoin Optech newsletter. And this week we'll be going through newsletter number 295, published on 27th of March 2024. I'll go through the preface of the newsletter quickly. So this week's newsletter announces the disclosure of a bandwidth wasting attack affecting Bitcoin Core and related nodes, describes several improvements to the idea for transaction fee sponsorship, and summarizes a discussion about using live mempool data to improve Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimation. Also included are our regular sections with selected questions and answers from the Bitcoin Stack Exchange, announcements of new releases and release candidates, and notable changes to popular Bitcoin infrastructure. So yeah, I'll first read the news articles verbatim, then try and share whatever I can. And anybody who wants to share their thoughts or information that they have, please feel free to just pop in and speak without raising the hand or anything. So the first article talks about the disclosure of a free relay attack. I'll highlight it. A bandwidth wasting attack was described to the Bitcoin dev mailing list. In short, Mallory broadcasts one version of a transaction to Alice and a different version of the transaction to Bob. The transactions are designed so that Bob won't accept Alice's version as an RBF replacement, and Alice won't accept Bob's version. Mallory then sends Alice a replacement that she will accept, but Bob won't. Alice relays the replacement to Bob, consuming their mutual bandwidth, but Bob rejects it, resulting in the relay bandwidth being wasted, called free relay. Mallory can repeat this multiple times until a transaction eventually gets confirmed, with each cycle seeing Alice accept the replacement, use bandwidth, sending it to Bob, and Bob rejecting it. The effect of the attack can be multiplied by Alice having multiple Bob-like peers who all reject the replacements, and Mallory sending multiple specially constructed transactions of this type in parallel. The attack is limited by the fee costs. Mallory will pay when some version of her transactions eventually confirms. Although the attack description notes that this can be essentially zero if Mallory was planning to send a transaction anyway, the maximum amount of bandwidth that can be wasted is limited by Bitcoin Core's existing transaction relay limits. Although it is possible that performing this attack many times in parallel could delay the propagation of legitimate unconfirmed transactions. The description also mentions another well-known type of known bandwidth wasting, where a user broadcasts a set of large transactions and then works with a miner to create a block that contains a relatively small transaction that conflicts with all the related transactions. For example, a 29,000 virtual byte transaction could remove about 200 megabytes of transactions from every relaying full node's mempool. The description argues that the existence of attacks that allow wasting bandwidth means that it should be reasonable to deliberately allow some amount of free relay, such as by enabling proposals like replace by fee rate. So this news article describes a free relay attack that can be performed by a malicious attacker that wants to eat up the bandwidth of the nodes and engage them in doing activity that is of absolutely no avail. Okay, so basically, in accordance with BIP 125, IRBF has 5 rules, okay? And rule number 3 of BIP 125 says that it requires a replacement transaction pay a higher absolute fee than the sum of the fees paid by the transaction being replaced in all of its children, okay? And the rule number 6 says that it requires a replacement transaction pay a higher fee rate than the average fee rate paid by the transaction being replaced and all of its children. Okay, so basically there are 5 rules. If you go through BIP 125, okay, which talks about RBF, there are 5 rules. Rule 3 says that for one transaction to replace the another transaction, okay, that transaction that is trying to replace should have a higher absolute fee than the absolute fee being paid by the transaction that it is trying to replace, along with the cumulative absolute fee of all of its ascendants. Okay, so like we have fee rate, which is what you pay in sats per virtual byte, and then we have this absolute fee rate, which is what you're paying for the entire transaction. So if transaction A is trying to replace transaction B, then transaction A has to pay a higher absolute fee than transaction B and all of transaction B's ascendants. That is rule number 3. Okay, and rule 6 is inferred. It's not mentioned in the web, but it's inferred that also the transaction A, which is trying to replace transaction B, needs to pay a higher fee rate. It needs to pay a higher fee rate per virtual byte. So even the absolute fee rate needs to be higher, and the absolute fee needs to be higher, and the fee rate also needs to be higher. And if any of these are not higher, then the transaction will be rejected. So this attack, as I have summarized it, is as such. Okay, so an attacker creates a transaction A, which you can see on the left side. Okay, now this transaction A is a large transaction. Okay, and it has a low fee rate, but it has a higher absolute fee rate. Okay, because it's large in size, so it pays a higher absolute fee, but the fee rate, that is the fee that you're paying per virtual byte, is low. The same attacker creates another transaction. Okay, transaction B is the same transaction. Okay, using the same inputs. Now this transaction is small in size. Okay, it has a high fee rate and a low absolute fee. Now because it is small in size, it has a low absolute fee. Now what the attacker does is that it will transmit or relay transaction A to Alice's node, for instance, and it will relay transaction B to Bob's node, for instance. Okay, so now Alice's node is aware about transaction A, okay, which has a low fee rate and a high absolute fee, and Bob's node is aware of transaction B, which is a small transaction which has a high fee rate and an absolute and a low absolute fee. Okay, now what happens in this situation is that as we scroll down, okay, if we look at the right side, okay, now Bob's node already has transaction B, right? You can see the green tick mark. So Bob's node already has transaction B. When transaction A reaches Bob's node will reject it because it's paying a low fee rate. Okay, it's paying a low fee rate, so it violates the rule number 6 that we talked about earlier. Okay, and if transaction B reaches Alice's node is going to reject it because it's paying a low absolute fee. So for any of these transactions to replace the other transaction, they need to pay both a higher fee rate and both a higher absolute fee. So Bob's node will reject transaction A because it's paying a low fee rate, and Alice's node will reject transaction B because it's paying a low absolute fee. Okay, so basically what is going to happen is either transaction A or transaction B is going to get mined. Both cannot get mined simultaneously. So either the bandwidth of Alice's node gets wasted or the bandwidth of Bob's node gets wasted, right? Because once Alice receives transaction A, she is going to further propagate it, right? Her node is further going to propagate this transaction, and Bob's node is further going to propagate transaction B. So all the nodes that propagate transaction A, if B gets mined, then that propagation is of absolutely no use. That bandwidth gets wasted. And if A gets mined, then the propagation of B gets wasted. Okay. Now this attack can get even worse when the attacker creates multiple variants of A. Okay. Now A has a very low fee rate. Okay. So what the attacker can do is create multiple variants of A, right? Like I've depicted it as A1. Okay. So the attacker can create A1, A2, A3, A4, and slowly increment the fee rate. Okay. The fee that it is paying per virtual byte, and ensure that the fee at no point in time exceeds the absolute fee of transaction B. So it can keep on incrementing it with a very small value, right? Like it can create transaction A, which has a very very small increment in the fee rate as compared to transaction A, and then you can create multiple variants of transaction A as A1, A2, A3. So when A1 is received by Alice's node will reject A and accept A1. Then A2, if it receives, it will reject A1 and accept A2. And then if it receives A3, it will reject A2 and accept A3. And Bob's node will reject all versions of transaction A until and unless they pay a higher fee rate and a higher absolute fee. So what an attacker can do is the attacker eventually wants just one of these transactions that it is broadcasting to get mined, but it can create so many variants of A, and all those variants of A will keep on getting rejected by Alice's node and also by Bob's node, thereby just eating up the bandwidth of the nodes. Okay, so this is what the attack is all about, to just make the nodes do redundant work and eat up their bandwidth and propagate transactions that are never going to get mined. And this is referred to as a free relay attack, where you're just freely relaying transactions that are never going to get mined. So this attack can be even more potent Okay, if the minimum relay fee has a very small slope. Okay, so for instance, like the minimum relay fee and the difference between the minimum relay fee and the maximum fee that you can increment for A, to ensure that it is still less than B. If that slope is very high, this attack becomes even more potent. And a mitigation, like how, like this is an attack, how do you mitigate it, how do you try to tackle it? So like one way of tackling it would be replaced by
Present,
feerate. Yeah,
do you
sure.
mind if I ask a question about the problem itself?
Yeah.
Or yeah, so I was curious that why would any node reject a transaction with absolute higher fee just because the fee rate is lower? Doesn't I mean for imagine if I imagine myself as a full node, I only care
Yeah,
that the
I got your
absolute
question. Yeah, I
right.
got your question. So
Hmm.
what you're saying is that, I mean, if like if you're saying that absolute fee should be the only criteria, or
Right.
appears to you right now that absolute fee should be the only criteria, right? But
Yes.
the block space also matters, right? For instance, there is a transaction, okay, that is, let's say, of 100 virtual bytes, okay, and that transaction is paying you 1 sats per virtual byte. Okay, so if you mine that transaction, you give away 100 virtual bytes of block space in exchange of 100 sats, right? Is that right?
Can you please give that example again?
Okay, let's assume there's a transaction, okay, and the size of that transaction is 100 virtual bytes,
Right.
okay, and the person who is broadcasting that transaction is willing to pay, let's assume, 1 sat per virtual byte, okay.
Right. Okay.
So the person who wants to get this transaction confirmed is paying the miner 100 sats, right? One
Yes.
sat per virtual byte, so 100 sats for 100
Yes.
virtual bytes, okay. So
Right.
he's buying a block space of 100 virtual bytes for 100 sats. That's okay.
Hmm. Yes.
Now
Yes.
let's say there's another person who is broadcasting a transaction of let's say uh, 10 virtual bytes, okay, 10 virtual bytes, and he's willing to pay 2 sats per virtual byte, twice of what the previous person was paying.
Hmm.
Okay, so now this person is willing to wants his transaction to get embedded in the blockchain, okay, for 20 sats, right? Because 2 sats per virtual byte, so 20 sats, okay.
Right.
So what appears prima facie is that 100 sats is more than 20 sats, okay. But what we are not taking into consideration here is that for 100 sats you are giving away 100 virtual bytes, right? But on the other transaction for 20 sats you're giving away only 10 virtual bytes. You still have 90 virtual bytes, okay, so you can sell that block space to somebody else, okay. You getting my point? So you
Yeah.
save, like, yeah, you save the
Right.
space, and the space that you save, okay, by mining that small transaction, you can sell it to somebody else.
Right.
That is
Right.
if
No,
the
makes sense.
mempool is full.
Yes,
Even if the
of course,
mempool
assuming.
is not full, even if the mempool is not full, as long, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true as well. If the mempool is full, yeah, true.
Right.
But then
So it's yeah.
in this case, we're talking strictly about replacing a transaction. So both transactions cannot go into the block at the same time. You have to choose one of the two.
Right. I think the metric that is important is not the transaction fee, it is the transaction fee per virtual byte, right? Because that's the metric that a node will care about, a miner at least.
There,
So,
yeah, there are multiple schools of thought pertaining this. The current implementation is that both are important. BIP 125 like stipulates that both are important. For transaction A to replace transaction B, the fee rate also needs to be high, and the absolute fee also needs to be high to tackle free relay. Okay, like if the fee rate is not a criteria, then the free relay attack might happen, and if the absolute fee is not high, then the pinning attack might happen. And we've talked about pinning attack like on multiple occasions. So like currently how it happens is that the transaction that is propagated later will only replace the transaction that is propagated earlier if it has a higher fee rate and a high absolute fee, both of them, to mitigate certain attacks that can be performed.
right. I think I just have one final question. If you can help me understand it, if the only metric for all full nodes and all miners was that whatever is the highest transaction fee per virtual byte, it's the ratio that they measure against for all transactions. Wouldn't that solve this problem? I mean, so it's like if it's 100 byte transaction, you pay 100 times more compared to a one virtual byte transaction, right? If you use that ratio as the
What
metric.
you're saying is, if I understand it correctly, is that the fee rate should be the only criteria. How much you're paying per virtual byte, that should be the only
Yes.
criteria. That's what you're saying.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Now
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
can, That can again
Yeah, what's the counter to
lead
that?
to a, yeah, the problem with that is that uh, the cost of attacking on eating up the bandwidth of the nodes is very little. Okay, so if somebody just wants to eat up your bandwidth, okay, I will broadcast a transaction, okay, and I will pay you, let's say, 1 sat per virtual byte. Okay, now a few seconds after that, I'll broadcast another transaction, 2 sats per virtual byte. After some time, another transaction, 3 sats per virtual byte,
Okay.
4 sats per virtual byte. Okay, I can keep on broadcasting those transactions. Okay, because now the
Okay.
only criteria is the fee rate. Okay, so I can like increase the fee rate only by 1 sat, and the transaction is still valid. It'll replace, right? Then again
Right.
1 byte, it'll replace. Again 1 byte, it'll replace. I
Right.
can keep on
Exactly.
sending you transactions, right? And I
Right.
can
These are
keep
for
on
the same
replacing the
inputs,
previous
right?
transaction.
These transactions are all
Yeah,
for the same inputs. Right. Right. Makes
yeah,
sense.
same purpose.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. Got it. Right.
so like the uh, I think Peter Todd implements this. He even runs this in his node. I'm not really sure about it, but like Peter Todd has been a strong advocate of something referred to as replace by fee rate. Okay, and he believes like what you were saying, that from my understanding, he believes that the transaction should be replaced based on the fee rate. Okay, and I mentioned that in that case, it'll be possible for somebody to just increment the fee by a sat, for instance, and
Right.
again relay the same transaction. His
Right.
solution is that replace by fee rate should happen at a fee ratio which is greater than 2x of the fee that you're paying right now. So if I'm right now paying, let's say, 10 sats per virtual byte, okay, I have to replace it by another transaction where the fee rate will be the only parameter, provided I am willing to pay at least twice of what I was paying. So now
Right.
I cannot make that attack of two sats and 3 sats and 4 sats. If initially it was 10, next is going to be 20, next is going to be 40, next is going to be 160. So the number of time I can recreate the transaction will get limited, because now my fee is increasing exponentially
Right.
by
There's a
2x.
cost to that. There's a cost to doing that now. Right.
Yes, exactly.
Right. There's a
Okay,
very
so
huge
this
cost.
is
Earlier, just 1 sat per read byte could be very less case.
exactly.
Right.
Yes, and now it's incrementing directly by it's incrementing twice. So 2 times and 4 times and 8 times and 16 times. So the attacker cannot get away with it. At some point in time, his transaction will get mined because of high fee.
Yep. Yep. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. So yeah, this is what the first news article talks about, the free relay attack, and like how to mitigate it. Currently, I don't think nodes are implementing this fee. I mean, replacing by fee rate. But Peter Todd, I've read on multiple occasions. He has articles as well and keeps talking about it on X as well. And I think he runs this on his node as well. So yeah, that is what I had to share about the first article. I hope like the broader concept has been conveyed. And if any questions or any thoughts, any insights anybody would like to share, please go ahead. Okay, if none, then let's move on to the second one. The title of the second news article is Transaction Fee Sponsorship Improvements. Okay. Martin Habosyak posted to the Bitcoin Dev mailing list an idea for allowing one transaction to boost the priority of an unrelated transaction. Fabian Jha noted that the fundamental idea appears to be very similar to transaction fee sponsorship, which was proposed in 2020 by Jeremy Rubin, see newsletter number 116. In Rubin's original proposal, the sponsor transaction committed to the boosted transaction using a zero value output script, which uses about 42 virtual bytes for a single sponsorship and about 32 bytes for each additional sponsorship. In Habostiak's version, the sponsor transaction commits to the boosted transaction using the Taproot Anex, which uses about 8 virtual bytes for a single sponsorship and 8 virtual bytes for each additional sponsorship. After hearing about Habostiak's idea, David Harding posted to Delving Bitcoin an efficiency improvement he and Rubin had previously developed in January. The sponsor transaction commits to the boosted transaction using the signature commitment message, which is never published on chain. So zero block space is used for a single commitment. To allow this, the sponsor transaction must appear in blocks and package relay messages immediately after the boosted transaction, allowing full node verifiers to infer the TXID of the boosted transaction when they verify the sponsor transaction. For cases where a block may contain multiple sponsor transactions that each commit to some of the same boosted transactions, it's not possible to simply have a series of boosted transactions appear immediately before their sponsors. So entirely inferable commitments is not an option. Harding describes a simple alternative that only uses 0.5 virtual bytes per boosted transaction. Anthony Towns improves upon that with a version that would never use more than 0.5 virtual bytes per boost and would use less space in most cases. Both Haberstiak and Harding note the potential for outsourcing. Anyone who is planning to broadcast a transaction anyway or who has an unconfirmed transaction they're willing to update with RBF can increase its fee rate and boost another transaction at an insignificant cost of 0.5 virtual bytes or less per boost. For comparison, 0.5 virtual bytes is about 0.3% of a one input to output P2TR transaction. Unfortunately, they both warn that there is no convenient way to trustlessly pay a third party for a boost. However, Haberstiak points out that anyone paying over the LN node would receive proof of payment and so could potentially prove deceit. Towns further notes that sponsors seem compatible with the proposed design for cluster mempool, that the most efficient versions of sponsorship present some mild challenges for transaction validity, caching, and concludes with a table showing the relative block space consumed by various current and proposed fee bumping techniques. At 0.5 virtual bytes or less per boost, the most efficient form of fee sponsorship is only bested by the 0.0 virtual bytes used in the best case with RBF in paying miners out of band. Because fee sponsorship allows a dynamic fee bumping and is almost as efficient as paying miners out of band, it may resolve a major concern with protocols that depend on exogenous fee. In continued discussion, shortly before this newsletter was about to be published, Suhas Daftar raised concerns that sponsors could introduce problems that are not easily addressed by cluster mempool and which could create problems for users who didn't need sponsors, indicating that sponsorship, if it is ever added to Bitcoin, should only be available to transactions that opt into allowing it. This was a big one, okay, and it contains a lot of different proposals, okay. Broadly, to just convey what this news article talks about is it talks about fee sponsorship, right? Currently, we have two mechanisms that can bump the fee of a transaction. One is RBF, one is CPFP, and then we also have this concept of anchor outputs. But all of these transactions like are interdependent on each other. Okay, they are like directly related to each other. They are linked to each other. Like, you know, they have a child parent relationship, or in RBF they have the same input, or an anchor output like is a hook on the transaction whose fee is being bumped. Okay, so they are directly linked with each other. This concept, and not only this, there are other concepts or proposals preceding this that have discussed a mechanism of bumping the fee of a transaction without directly linking those transactions to each other. I mean, transaction A and transaction B are completely independent of each other. Despite that, transaction B can bump the fee of transaction A. And there are multiple people who have come up with their proposals and ideas and thoughts. And I think Jeremy Rubin was one who came up with an idea in 2020. And there are others as well. Okay, so we will not go into all of them because that is outside the purview of this session. Will eat up a lot of time. We'll just talk about the one proposed by Martin Haberstiak, okay, because that is like the spine of this article. His proposal, I think he calls it anyone can boost. Okay, so he's come up with a proposal where transaction A can bump the fee of transaction B, even though transaction A and B are absolutely independent of each other and they do not rely on each other per se. Now, how this works is, okay, firstly, has like anybody heard of this term called Taproot Anex? Annex. Okay, because even I heard it for the first time when I was going through the newsletter. Okay, so I'll just first briefly go through what transaction fee sponsorship improvement is. Okay, so fee sponsorship is a proposed consensus change to allow the creation of transactions which effectively add fees to other unrelated transactions. Okay, this is important to emphasize on unrelated transactions, possibly helping those other transactions confirm faster. It enables CPFP like fee bumping without the transactions needing to be related. I mean, the transactions need not be a child and a parent transaction. They are completely independent. Despite that, one transaction can bump the fee of the other transaction. Okay, now how does this happen? So there's a field or a placeholder called annex, okay, in the witness data of a Taproot transaction. Okay, it's a placeholder. I see this as pretty analogous to opnops. Okay, we have opnops in Bitcoin, which are like placeholders. They are opcos that do not have any direct or immediate implementation, but they are there as placeholders, and they can be utilized like for further upgrades or further consensus changes, and their implementation can be amended, like we did with I think Opnop 1 and Opnop 2, or Opnop 2 and Opnop 3. I'm not sure. Okay, we changed their implementations with SegWit version 1 as Op CLTV and Op CSV. Okay, so there's this placeholder in Annex currently, to the best of my information. Uh, like Bitcoin nodes do not relay any transaction that has any data in Annex. It's like an optional thing right now, but it's not standardized as of now. Might be used for future implementation. So what the proposal says is, for instance, there's a transaction A, okay, which needs its fee to be bumped. Transaction B can bump its fee provided transaction B has the transaction ID of transaction A in its annex. Okay, annex is a placeholder in the witness data of a Taproot transaction, which can include arbitrary data. Okay, it's a placeholder that can include arbitrary data. So in that placeholder, you can embed the transaction ID of a transaction whose fee you want to boost. Okay, so for instance, if Shreyan broadcasts a transaction, okay, and that transaction, let's say, has a low fee, or an ideal situation would be to consider the Lightning transaction. Okay, like in Lightning transaction, and there are other L2 protocols as well in Bitcoin, in which you need pre-signed transactions. Okay, so you sign the commitment transaction way before it is broadcasted, and at that time it is not possible for you to precisely stipulate what the fee is going to be when you broadcast that commitment transaction. So in most cases, these commitment transactions on a Lightning network or any pre-signed protocol in Bitcoin generally requires fee bumping, which can be done by CPFP, or it can be done by anchor outputs, like we've discussed at length in preceding sessions. Okay, so let's say that Shreyan broadcasts a commitment transaction which has a very low fee, and it is not getting mined because it has a very low fee. Okay, so or let's say Mango wants to broadcast another transaction. It's completely independent of Shreyan's transaction. Mango just wants to make a transaction to some of his friends. Okay, now what Mango can do is Mango can use a P2T transaction, take the annex, which is a placeholder in the witness data of a Taproot transaction, and in that placeholder, Mango can embed the TX ID of Shreyan's transaction, okay, which has a low fee, and mention that, hey, I'm going to pay the fee to bump the fee of Shreyan's transaction that has TXID EBCDE. Okay, and now the condition is that both the boosting transaction and the boosted transaction should be included in the same block. Okay, and for that, like you can use something like a package relay, for instance, that both the boosting transaction and the boosted transaction have to be relayed in the same package, or you have to make some consensus change to ensure that both the boosting and the boosted transactions are included together, relayed together, and included in the same block. Okay, so what the miner will see is the miner will see Mango's transaction, or it has an annex. Okay, and it will look at the annex and we see the TXID. This TXID is the TXID of Shreyan's commitment transaction. So they will cumulatively mine both the transactions and compensate for the low fee that Shreyan's transaction is paying uh, by by including Mango's transaction, which is paying a high fee. So this is a mechanism where you do need to always keep a spare UTXO to bump your transaction, okay? Because when it comes to CPFP, you always have to keep a spare UTXO as a child to bump the transaction fee of the parent. Or when it comes to an anchor output, again, you need to keep a spare UTXO to attach it to the anchor output, because the anchor output is a zero value output that pays to an octave script, so it doesn't have any value. It's in fact below the dust value. So you have to keep a spare UTXO. In this case, you don't have to keep a spare UTXO. The solution generally being considered is that there will be third-party service providers who will just do this. Like they will look out for people who are looking for boosting transactions, okay, and they'll get paid, for instance, over the Lightning network or out of band or in any way, shape, or form, and they will create these transactions, and one single boosting transaction can boost multiple transactions simultaneously. So this is like the whole concept of creating a mechanism where two transactions that are completely unrelated, one of those transactions can bump the fee of the other transaction. And like the upgrades that it has over CPFP and anchor output, for instance, is that you don't always have to keep a UTXO in spare. Okay, it also doesn't increase the UTXO data set. Okay, because a person B who's boosting, maybe he already has to make a transaction, he'll just increase the fee. Okay, so you don't add burden on the UTXO set, and also it enhances privacy, because generally, in the case of CPFP, the heuristics will reveal that the child and the parent transaction both belong to one person. Even in the case of an anchor output, because the anchor output is a zero value output that pays to an opt-to script. It is pretty easy for somebody to scan the blockchain and determine that, hey, this is an anchor output that is being attached to the commitment transaction of our Lightning channel. But in this case, because these two transactions are independent of each other on the blockchain, it's difficult to analyze, because the annex is not embedded in the blockchain. So it's difficult. There's no link between these two transactions. They're completely independent. So they also enhance the privacy of the users. This is broadly what the second news article talks about. I hope I was able to convey broadly what the proposal suggests. If any questions or anything to share, please go ahead and do so.
Right, it does explain. I have one question. Is it only a signal to the node that you can include this transaction that I'm signaling to through the TXID, or is there some consensus that that node has to operate?
There has to be. There has to be, just like we have package relay. Okay, in a package relay, the child and the parent have to necessarily be included in the package. Okay, so like this might need a consensus change. It might need a soft fork where you ensure, where you make amendments to the relay policies, you make amendments to the way the transactions are ordered in the mempool, to ensure that the boosting transaction and the boosted transaction are necessarily included together in the same block.
Right.
Something like a package relay.
Right. Otherwise, I would imagine that you can already use something like op return to just reference a TXID, right? There's clearly something more than just reference to a TXID.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, it will need consensus changes for sure. Like when I was going through multiple packages, I think it even mentions must appear in blocks and package. If I can highlight, okay, a package relay. So like something like this, where the boosted and the boosting transaction have to be paired together somehow or the other, because the condition is that both of them have to be included in the same block. Okay, and for that there has to be a mechanism that they are included in the same block. Maybe they are coupled together while being relayed, or how. I'm not very well aware about the intricate details of it. But the bottom line is that they need to be included in the same block, and there needs to be a mechanism to ensure that they're included in the same block.
Do you mind going over what are package relay messages? I might have heard it, but I'm not sure if I know what it is.
There, what the name suggests, like for instance, if I can give you an example, if I want to broadcast a transaction that has a very, very low fee, okay, it has such a low fee that it's not even entering like the mempool of certain nodes, let's say. Okay, so in that situation, what you can do is you can create a child for it that has a higher fee. Okay, and then you can couple the child and the parent as a package and then relay them together. Okay, so they'll get relayed to nodes together, and when they are relayed together to the nodes, even if one transaction has a fee that is so low that it cannot even enter the mempool, the child has a higher transaction fee. So the average fee is above the level, the threshold that the nodes are willing to accept. So they are relayed together because one transaction has such a low fee that other nodes will not even accept it in the mempool.
So it's a concept related directly to CPFP, or
no? It's a concept related to relaying. I mean, it just has to do with relaying.
Right. But it's used directly in CPFP, but I think it's a broader concept that might be used somewhere else.
I think this is but this is more specific to relaying, because even for a node to relay a transaction, the transaction needs to have a certain amount of fee for the node to even think about usurping its bandwidth. But okay, so if that transaction has such a low fee that a node is not even willing to relay it, then it has to be its fee has to be bumped by a child so that the node is incentivized to relay that transaction.
Right. No, I find it interesting that there's not only just there is no free lunch in Bitcoin, there is no free transaction that a miner is accepting, but there's no free relaying either.
True. Cool. We move on to the third one. Third and the last, I guess. Okay. So the third one is mempool-based fee rate estimation. Abubakar Sadiq Ismail posted to Delving Bitcoin about improving Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimation using the data from a node's local mempool. Currently, Bitcoin Core generates estimates by recording the block height when each confirmed transaction is received, the block height when it is confirmed, and its fee rate. When all of that information is known, the delta between the received height and confirmed height is used to update an exponentially weighted moving average for a bucket that represents a range of fee rates. For example, a transaction that takes 100 blocks to confirm with a fee rate of 1.1 sat per virtual byte will be incorporated into the average for the 1 sat per virtual byte bucket. An advantage of this approach is its resistance to manipulation. All transactions must be both delayed, meaning they're available to all miners, and confirmed, meaning they can't violate any consensus rules. A disadvantage is that it only updates once per block and can lag far behind other estimates that use real-time mempool information. Ismail has taken previous discussion about incorporating mempool data into fee rate estimates, written some preliminary code, and performed an analysis showing how the current algorithm and a new algorithm compare, not including some safety checks. A reply to the thread also linked to previous research on this topic by Callie Alm and led to a discussion about whether mempool information should be used to both raise and lower fee rate estimates, or if it should only be used to lower estimates. The advantage of doing both is that it overall makes the estimates more useful. The advantage of only lowering estimates using mempool data while only raising estimates using the existing confirmation-based estimation is that it could be more resistant to manipulation and positive feedback loops. Uh, okay. So I think we have broadly in previous sessions, not broadly, I think we have pretty much in detail talked about the algorithm that Bitcoin Core currently implements to include transactions into the mempool and also like kick them out. Okay, and the algorithm that Bitcoin uses to include transactions in the mempool is based on the ancestor fee rate. So like if a transaction is trying to enter the mempool and there's congestion in the mempool and it's trying to remove another transaction, then the only criteria based on which it can do that is that it pays a higher fee as compared to the fee being paid by the transaction that it is trying to remove and all of its ancestors. Okay, so while accepting a new transaction, we take into consideration the ancestor fee rate, and while kicking out a transaction, we take into consideration the descendant fee rate. And there has been some criticism about Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimation algorithm, BTC Pay Server, which was using Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimation, recently opted out because it was finding discrepancies and it was noticing that it's paying a higher fee as compared to the other algorithms. And I think they shifted to mempool.space. Okay, so here Abubakar Sadiq Ismail has come up with a proposal which suggests that we should use the live or the current or the real time state of the mempool to calculate the fee rate. Currently, what Bitcoin Core does is that it calculates the fee rate based on the previously mined blocks. Okay, so it takes into consideration the height at which a transaction was received. Okay, unconfirmed transaction is received, and it takes into consideration the height when it is confirmed and the fee rate that it's paying. So let's say a transaction was first received when the block height was n, and it got mined with the block height was n plus 3, and it paid a fee of x sat per virtual byte. Okay, so that will be taken into consideration that from n to n plus 3, it took 3 blocks. You paid x sat per virtual byte and it took 3 blocks. So based on that, it is calculated that what is the possibility of another transaction that also pays x sats per virtual byte to get confirmed in the next 3 blocks. Okay, but this is based on the blocks that are already mined. And here there's a proposal to utilize the current state or the live state of the mempool instead of referring to the previously mined blocks to improve and enhance and make Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimation more precise. Let me see if there's something in my notes that can be used to better explain. Okay, I'll just read through it. I think this could be beneficial. So currently, Bitcoin Core's mempool-based fee rate estimation, how is it? Currently, Bitcoin Core generates estimates by recording the block height when each unconfirmed transaction is received, the block height when it is confirmed, and its fee rate. A disadvantage is that it updates only once per block. Okay, so the fee rate will update only once per block because this equation changes only once in a block, right? So you take into consideration the block height, when the transaction is received, the block height when the transaction is confirmed. Okay, and the block height can only change once a new block is mined. So the fee rate estimation is updated only once on an average of 10 minutes when a new block is mined, which is a disadvantage. So like once a fee rate is determined, it will not change if the next block is mined, which is approximately 10 minutes. So a disadvantage is that it updates only once per block and lags behind other fee estimators that estimate fee in real time. So most other fee estimators take the current state of the mempool and update the fee rate estimation in live time. They don't wait for 10 minutes. So Abu Bakr Sadiq Ismail, okay, what suggestions he gives is we can add some sanity checks, okay? What sanity checks we can add is that firstly, we can check by checking if most of the transactions in previously mined blocks were present in the node's mempool when the target block arrived. Okay, so you look at a mempool, okay, you look at a certain mempool, you look at for instance your local mempool, okay, at given time X, okay, and then you look at the block that was mined at time X, and you see how many transactions that were in your mempool that were supposed to get mined as per your fee rate estimator, and how many of them actually got mined. Okay, so if your fee rate estimation at a given time X tells you that a certain set of transactions are certain to be mined in the next block, you look at the blockchain and see the consistency. If all those transactions or an overwhelming majority of those transactions that your fee rate estimator at a given time X was predicting will get included in a certain block, if they all of them get included or most of them get included, it means that your node or the state of your node is very similar to the state of the block that was mined. Okay, and also like all mempools have scores that they give to their transactions. Okay, depending on higher the score, the higher is the possibility of a transaction getting mined. So you look at the state of your node and see which are the transactions that have a very high score, and then you compare it with the block that was actually mined to see if the high score transactions in your block actually get mined. So if all the high score transactions in your block get mined, okay, and also if most of the transactions that your fee rate estimator predicts will get mined in the next block, if they actually get mined in the next block, then this shows that your mempool resembles the mempool of the mine. Okay, because the biggest problem, the biggest impediment in using real time data to calculate fee estimation is that you don't know whether your mempool is the same as the miner's mempool. Okay, so for your fee rate estimator to be accurate, the set of transactions in your mempool should be the same or at least overwhelmingly similar to the set of transactions included in the mempool of the miner. Okay. Now, for instance, if you have certain configuration set which do not permit you to relay certain transactions, for instance, if you're not relaying, let's say, transactions that have arbitrary data, if you're not relaying transactions that are SegWit, and if the major miners are relaying those transactions, then obviously your mempool will look very different as compared to the miner's mempool, and then your fee rate estimator will never be able to come up with an accurate estimation because it is using your local mempool and the set of transactions in your local mempool to determine what the fee rate will be, whereas the miners, the miners that have the majority of the hash power, their mempool looks completely different. So for lifetime fee rate estimation, it's imperative that the local mempool status and the transactions in the local mempool for which you are estimating the fee should resonate the transactions in the miner's mempool. And to ensure that, you need to perform some sanity checks. Okay, the two checks that I just mentioned. One of them is to make sure that all the high score transactions in your local mempool are getting mined. That is an indicator that your mempool is similar to the mempool of the miners whose blocks are getting mined. And another check would be to see that the transaction that your fee rate estimator estimated will get included in the next block, do they actually get included in the next block? If these two sanity checks are both true, there is a very high possibility that your mempool is resonating the mempool of the major miners, and then it becomes rational to use your mempool's current and live status to estimate the fee rate calculation for Bitcoin Core. Okay, so that broadly is the proposal, that most advanced fee rate estimators use the live state of the mempool, whereas Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimation does not do that. So even Bitcoin Core's fee rate estimation should do that, and to do that, we have to ensure that the local mempool set of transactions resonate the set of transactions in the mempool of the miner, and to do that, we perform these two sanity checks. That is what the proposal as a whole is. Yes, somebody would like to talk?
I had to. Yeah. I think Mango said something. Never mind. I just have a quick thought. Yeah, I'll just share my quick thought, and I think whoever is saying, then he can share his. So I was saying that I think realistically, feerate estimation is more reliable if done directly from a miner, as in a miner gives you the fee rate estimate. Do you think you agree, or do you think it's more there is some merit to doing it on your local mempool and calculating your own fee rate?
Uh, I I think the sanity checks make more sense because if it's like your the set of transactions in your mempool are different as compared to the set of transactions in the miner's mempool, right? So like when you are estimating the fee rate, okay, from your own node, what makes sense is that you take into consideration your own local mempool because that is what you're routing the payment through, okay? And I mean, there are mechanisms through which you can definitely, get to know what a miner is estimating. Okay, but if you want to take the estimation from your own node, then it is important that the set of transactions in your node should resonate with the set of transactions that the miners have. Okay, like for instance, if you're running a node that doesn't support SegWit, you are not able to include 95% of the transactions in your mempool that are in the miner's mempool. So it absolutely makes zero sense for you to use your local node's fee rate estimator. Okay, so I mean, it's you can
Right.
do both. I don't see the trade-offs, but it only makes sense for you to estimate the fee using your own node when you are like the set of transactions that you have in the mempool are the set of transactions that miners also have in your mempool. So ensuring that is very important. If that is not the case, then your local node is always going to give an erroneous fee rate estimation.
Yep.
Mango, you wanted to say something or?
No, it wasn't me. I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. We'll go to the Bitcoin stack exchange questions and answers. So the first, I'll just read the question and I'll give the answer. We'll not open the actual link because then we'll run out of time. It's 8:51 already. Okay, so the first question is, what are the risks of running a pre-SegWit node? Has anybody heard about this talk going on Bitcoin X or maybe even a Noster about some people thinking about running a pre-SegWit node, a node that does not relay SegWit transactions, and what's the reason behind it? Has anybody heard anything of that sort?
Is it the ocean mining thing that Luke Dash Jr. is working on?
I'm not able to recognize the voice. Was that Anmol or Shreyan?
Me, Shreyan.
Okay. I won't take any names, but the thing is, there are some people, there are a lot of people, in fact, who believe that like Bitcoin's blockchain should only be used to embed monetary data. Okay, and I'm one among them to the best of my knowledge. Okay, my understanding. I firmly believe that Bitcoin's blockchain should only embed monetary data, and that is the only use case of Bitcoin. Uh, the thing is, there are a lot of people who are unhappy about arbitrary data being embedded on the Bitcoin blockchain. We've seen instances where people have put the entire Bitcoin white paper on the blockchain. Okay, I'm not talking about a link or a hash, the actual white paper on the blockchain. There are people who have embedded videos on blockchain. Then there are people who have embedded that which is referred to as inscriptions on the blockchain. And I think in 2023, almost 50% of the block space was usurped and eaten up by non-monetary data, which is actually worrisome. So there are a lot of people who are not at all okay with non-monetary data being embedded in the Bitcoin blockchain because we've seen other cryptocurrencies how they start bloating when non-monetary data is embedded, and how every node, like for instance, if I'm running a node, my node has to download that Bitcoin white paper, my node has to download that all those JPEGs, my node has to download all those videos and has to bear the burden of storing them and usurping my bandwidth. Okay, whereas I believe it's not a use case and it doesn't add any value to Bitcoin. So there are a lot of people who believe that this should not happen. And I personally got to know about this movement through this question itself, that there are people who are planning to run a pre-SegWit node because a lot of avenues that are being used by people who embed non-monetary data on the blockchain are being used by upgrades that happen to Bitcoin post-SegWit. Okay. now maybe those upgrades were not intended for these use cases, but they have avenues which are being used. So like some people believe that hey, we should go back to old school. Okay, we go back to running a pre-segwit node until and unless these issues are not fixed, until and unless changes are not made to Bitcoin core that prevent what they refer to as spam. They refer to as non-monetary data as spam until and unless changes are made to Bitcoin core such that spam or non-monetary data should not be allowed to embed in the Bitcoin. We are going to go back and run the pre-segwit nodes to ensure that only monetary transaction is being routed through our node. Okay, so this is what's happening. And would it be good? Would it be bad? Network-wise, the answer broadly says, I think I've listed out some drawbacks of what could happen. Where is it? Yeah, first, like there are obviously drawbacks, okay, and the first one would be not being able to detect invalid transactions or blocks. Okay, so if there is an invalid transaction, let's say there's an invalid SegWit transaction, or there's a block that includes an invalid SegWit transaction that is relayed to you, you cannot detect that it's invalid because your node does not even understand it. Okay, so you will have to rely on other peers to detect whether a transaction is valid or no, or to detect whether a block is valid or no. You cannot do it on your own because your node doesn't even understand it. 95% of the transactions that are relayed currently are SegWit transactions. So your node will not detect 95% of those transactions and 95% of the transactions that are included in the block. And thus it cannot even validate whether it's a valid transaction or it's an invalid transaction. You will have to rely on your peers to do that.
So
And
for it,
again,
it will always be a valid transaction for that node. I think it will be a bandwidth and storage problem until the block is mined, that they will have to now include that transaction in their mempool, because there is no way for them to know that it is actually invalid. Right?
yeah, I mean, on their own, they cannot know it. On their own, they cannot know it. Okay.
But I think it's not a huge problem. It's like when the next block comes in and those transactions which are included, now you immediately know that these are the valid ones, right?
Yeah.
But I agree. But the invalid ones, you'll still have to maintain them, right, on your mempool.
And if the number of people who do this, it keeps on increasing, then it adds a problem. If like few handful of people are doing it, it's different. But if it gathers momentum, then majority of the nodes cannot. Not even majority, but if a good percentage of nodes start running pre-segwit nodes, then pre-segwit versions of Bitcoin Core, then the majority of the nodes cannot detect what a valid transaction is and what a valid block is. This will lead to a lot of reorgs.
Right. Yeah. That's right. It's an interesting problem. Yeah.
I think this is more of a rebellion. It doesn't sound rational. It's not that somebody's trying to rationally do this or somebody's trying to say, hey, we've got a fix. It's more of a rebellion that, we want this fixed and we want strict protocols.
It's not still a problem. I'm still thinking through it. I can understand the cost you just discussed. You just laid out. But I also think it is pretty possible, right? The only cost is the storage could be a problem. I think somebody could spam your node very easily, right? Just sending a lot of actually invalid but valid to you transactions.
If you're running a node that cannot detect 95% of the transactions, I don't even understand why you're running a node.
Right.
The primary purpose of you running a node is that you yourself as a sovereign individual should verify each and every transaction, right? And if you're running a node that cannot verify 95% of the transactions, I don't even understand why somebody is running a node that cannot detect 95% of the transactions.
I have a very basic question. So if you're only checking the block hashes of the valid blocks, how good enough is that? Is that good enough? You're still just verifying that the block is valid and the transactions within those blocks are valid. Are you still a full node? Is that a good consensus metric?
If you're valid, you said that if you're validating a block and a transaction, if you're validating every transaction, then yes, you're a full node.
No, but you're not. No. That's what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you're only validating a block. And if it's a valid block, it has the valid proof of work. Then you're validating all the transactions within that block. So to ensure that nobody mined a valid block with an invalid transaction, right? Because that will throw you out of consensus. So you do not validate every transaction. You only validate blocks, and then you validate the transactions within it just to verify that nobody wanted to throw you out of consensus, right? And then that way you're not bearing the cost of storing every transaction. The problem that you said, right? That why would you run a node now if 90% of the transactions are could potentially be invalid?
This is sequential. Okay, first you validate each and every individual transaction. Okay, when it's relayed, when it's unconfirmed. Okay, and then the transaction gets confirmed in a block, and then you validate that block. Okay, so you cannot validate. I mean, you
No,
have
it
to
will
validate
also, I
every
don't think it's
transaction.
always sequential. I don't think it's always sequential. You can receive a block in which there was a transaction which was not in your mempool, right? So you have to now validate that transaction in that
Yeah,
block.
like when you're on the Bitcoin network and you are gossiping with nodes, right? Those nodes are going
Hmm.
to send all the transactions that they have. Yes, you're absolutely right when you say that all.
Hmm.
It's not necessary that a block that gets mined, every single transaction in that block was
Is
in
in
your
your
memory.
mempool
Okay,
already,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That's
Hmm.
absolutely true. In that case, you verify that transaction. Okay, you verify that transaction. The ones that it's basically that is what I was coming to. It's referred to as compact block relay. Okay, so
Hmm.
what happens is that first you verify all the transactions that are relayed to you through nodes. Okay, individually
Hmm.
you verify those transactions. Okay, and then when a block gets mined, you get a compact block. You don't take the block again and validate the entire block. You get a compact block. Now what does that compact block has? That compact block has hashes of the transactions. Okay, not like the sha256 hash. Okay, it's another mechanism that is used such that the hash of every transaction is only 8 bytes, I think. Okay, so what you do is you take each transaction from your mempool, you hash it and match it with the hashes in the compact block. Okay, and then if the transaction matches, it means that the transaction was already in your mempool. Okay, and then you
Hmm.
replace the hash with the actual transaction. Okay, now let's say there's a transaction that wasn't in your mempool and it got mined. Okay, so now you can't pull up that transaction from your
Right.
mempool and hash it and match it. Okay, in that situation you go back to the person who like your peers. Okay, and ask for those missing transactions, and then you
Hmm.
include that in the block. Okay, so with
Okay.
this is not possible. This wasn't possible before. This is not possible in pre-segwit nodes. Okay,
Right.
so the
Yes.
block validation it becomes very much cumbersome. Okay, so that is
Okay.
another drawback. And there are other features like store signature, like Taproot, like Miniscript, like descriptors. Okay, like you
Hmm.
can't indulge in
Even
public key
Lightning Network,
aggregation.
you can't participate in the Lightning Network anymore, right? I
True,
think.
yeah.
Wow, this is a real problem, right? I thought because my first impression first, it could be a very first naive impression for anybody that if it was possible, then this is like a good consensus, right? It's like ordinal people can now do ordinal shit, and people who do not who want to purge all of that can now run a pre-segwit node. A naive first take could be that, right? This is a good solution because segwit is a soft fork, right? It's not like you're out of consensus if you run a pre-segwit node, but I think it has a very very deep uh, second order effects that it's not scalable, it's not a solution.
True. Even I said, I don't think this is a solution. This is more like,
Hmm.
I mean,
Right.
I don't know if you can
This
call
is
it a
more
rebellion or
like
something. It's like just
right.
a way of showing your opposition or your stance or your disinterest
Hmm.
towards a certain concept that you rebel in
Right.
such a manner. But I don't see this as a
Okay.
practical uh, something that's going to happen practically.
Hmm.
But let's see. Okay, we'll quickly go through the other questions. We're already at 9. Okay, so we'll try and wind it up by 9:15. When is op return cheaper than op false op if? And just when we were talking about arbitrary data, there is a question which asks which is a good mechanism to embed arbitrary non-monetary data on the blockchain. Is it op return? You all know what op return is. It's basically an opcode that allows you to embed 80 bytes of unspendable data, which is generally used for embed arbitrary data on the blockchain. What is op false op if? It is basically a set of opcode or subsequent opcodes that are used uh, by ordinals to what they refer to as inscriptions to embed JPEG on the blockchain. Okay, so it's like op false, op if, op push, op in. You use these four opcodes, and between them you embed the arbitrary data that you want to embed. So if somebody wants to embed arbitrary data, a JPEG or something, if they think it's a use case on the blockchain, then what is the most cost efficient way to do it? Should one use op return or should one use op false op if? So where is it? I think the answer says that it depends on the size of the data that you're trying to embed. To a certain extent, op return is more cost efficient. After that, using op false op if, op push and op print, which is used by inscriptions, is more efficient. So it depends on which school of thought do you belong to. Why does BIP 340 use SecP 256K1? Okay, so the question is that BIP 340 is about Schnorr signatures, all right? We've come up with new digital signatures that allow public key aggregation and that allow digital signature aggregation and that facilitate Taproot because they are used in especially in the script parts pending. Okay, so when we had to come with a completely new digital signature, Schnorr signature, which is completely unrelated to the previous signature mechanism that we had using ECDSA, why did we use the same curve, sec P256K1? Why did we not use any other curve? Okay. So Peter Woola answered this question, and broadly what he said is that uh, uh, I'll just go through the answer because I think he's mentioned some dates, so I don't want to misquote the dates. Yeah. So music is like music uses Schnorr signatures. Frost and music to use Schnorr signatures, and these are proposals that came up in Jan 2018, Jan 2020, and Jan 21. Okay, so these were even before BIP 340. Okay, so that is why the most popular or the contemporary being used digital key derivation mechanism was ECDSA, and that is why like BIP 340 or Schnorr signatures also stuck to. What do you say, sec P256K1, which is the curve that ECDSA uses for public key derivation. And another reason is reusability of existing key derivation infrastructure. So you don't go to another. You don't go to build another key derivation infrastructure. You stick to the current one, and you don't, and also not changing security assumptions because it was tried and tested on Bitcoin blockchain to be robust. So there was no need to shift uh, to another digital key derivation scheme or to another curve, and that is why even though Schnorr signatures are completely independent of ECDSA, they use the same elliptic curve. What criteria does Bitcoin Core use to create block templates? We've discussed this. They use the ancestor feerate criteria. Okay, so like whoever wants can go through this answer. The diagram I find is very helpful. The answer I don't know if it's by Peter Woola or Mark or Hart. Yeah, he explains it very well that the ancestor fee rate is taken into consideration while creating block templates. So a transaction that has a higher ancestor fee rate will be included in the block. So this is GC. It has a parent C, which has two parents P1, P2, and this is another parent GP. This is the grandparent, the parents, the children, and the grandchild. Okay, so the grandchild will be included in the block. When the grandchild is being included in the block, the fee of the child and both the parents and the grandparents and all the ancestors will be taken into consideration. So if two transactions are competing for space in the mempool, the transaction that pays the highest cumulative ancestor fee will be taken into consideration and will be included in the block. How does the initial block download field in the get blockchain info RPC work? So this basically get blockchain info RPC. I think some of us or most of us must have used this during LBTCL. Okay, so it gives out information pertaining your blockchain, and it also tells you whether the block is in the initial block download stage or no. So whenever you start up a node from scratch and you bootstrap it, this initial block download field is true because your node obviously is downloading the blocks. Okay, and it behaves differently. It does not relay transactions. When you start a new node and it is syncing the blockchain, it does not relay transactions. It behaves differently. Okay, so how is that determined? That is determined based on whether the value to this field is true or false. If the initial block download is true, the block will not relay transactions because it is still syncing with the blockchain and its resources are utilized elsewhere. Okay, once the blockchain has been sunk, then this initial block download will become false, and then we start acting like a regular node and we start relaying transactions. Okay, so for how long is this initial block download false? The currently active chain has at least as much cumulative proof of work as the hard-coded constant in the software. So there's a hard-coded constant in the software which determines the minimum amount of cumulative proof of work that a chain must have for it to be considered as active chain. So if the node has a chain which has cumulative proof of work which is equal or greater than that hard-coded constant, then the initial block download will become false and the node will start relaying transactions. The second parameter is that the timestamp of the currently active tip is no more than 24 hours in the past. So if the active tip of your node, the timestamp for it is less than 24 hours, then the initial block download will turn false and it will start acting as a normal node and it will start relaying transactions. Two release and release candidates. Bitcoin Core 26.1 RC2 is a release candidate. for a maintenance or release of the network's predominant full node implementation. And the second one is Bitcoin Core 27.0 RC1 is the release candidate for the next major version of the network's predominant full node implementation. Okay, so like even we conducted a PR review moderated by Status 4 and shared our insights and experiences of how it was to test Bitcoin Core 27.0 RC1. It wasn't recorded, but these guys, I'm not sure even if these guys are recorded, but you'll find the transcripts. Okay, you'll find the transcripts of the chat history. So you can go through that, and there's also a testing guide, nice testing guide, which you can go through and test it yourself. Okay, even on the reg test you can test it, even on the signet you can test it. Notable code and documentation changes. We'll try and wind this up in 5 minutes. Bitcoin Core 28950 PR updates the submit package RPC with arguments for max fee rate and max burnout amount. So like we were talking about what's a package relay, you use this RPC to relay the package of transactions, submit package. Okay. Now it has added 2 new arguments, max fee rate and max burnout. So you can stipulate a threshold. Okay. So if you set a max fee rate, the entire package will not pay a fee rate higher than that fee rate. Okay. So you don't end up overspending. This is a sanity check. Max burnout amount, it checks the amount in the op return. Okay, like for instance, op return generally is intended for embedding non-monetary data. So you can stipulate a threshold. If you want only arbitrary data to be included in the op return, you can set max burnout amount to be 0, so that if there is any monetary data, if there's any output that is in the op return, that will get rejected. Okay, so these are 2 sanity checks to prevent the users from overspending or burning their money. LND PR number 8418 begins polling its connected Bitcoin protocol client for its full node peers BIP113 fee filter values. Okay, so what this is about is that this PR, what it does is that, for instance, if you have an LND node which is connected to a Bitcoin node, okay, because the Lightning network is not aware of like the mainnet, right? The Lightning network does not know what is happening on layer 1. Okay, so the Lightning network cannot estimate fee. Right, so your Lightning node cannot tell you, give you a fee estimation because it has no access. It doesn't have a mempool. It doesn't have access to the mainnet. Okay, so it relies on a Bitcoin node to estimate fee for it. So your Lightning node, your LND Lightning node is connected to a Bitcoin node that estimates the fee for it. And what this PR does is that all Bitcoin nodes have this parameter called fee filter, where they can stipulate a certain amount. If the fee that a transaction is paying is below this amount, they will not relay that transaction. Okay, so the Bitcoin node that is connected to your Lightning node will query its peers and see what their fee filter is. It will use a moving median to calculate the minimum amount of fee that a commitment transaction from a Lightning channel must pay in order for that commitment transaction to get successfully broadcasted over the network, and we use that as a parameter to determine the fee that a commitment transaction on a Lightning channel should pay. LDPI 2756 adds support for including a trampoline routing packet in its messages. This doesn't provide full support for using trampoline routing or providing trampoline routing services, but it does make it easier for other code to accomplish that using LDK. What's trampoline routing? Okay, so like lightweight clients, okay, lightweight clients do not have the entire graph channel, okay, so they rely on full Lightning nodes to route the payments for them, okay, because it's a light client, it does not have the graph, the entire channel graph, so the light client cannot find the entire path. Okay, the path routing and the path determination cannot be done by a light client. So it depends on a full node, and these full node are known as trampoline nodes. So the light client contacts a full node and tells them to draft a path for them. Okay, so this is known as trampoline routing. So LDK 2756, this is a new PR that includes support for trampoline routing packets in its messages. LDK PR number 2935 begins supporting key spend payments to blinded paths. Okay, what are key spend payments? Like we're all aware of how payments are routed on the Lightning channel. Okay, they are routed through HTLCs, and these HTLCs can only be unlocked using a pre-image. Okay, so the recipient of Lightning payment has a pre-image which it shares with the preceding node or the penultimate node. Okay, and then the penultimate node shares it with its predecessor, then it goes all the way back to the sender. Okay, and then the sender hashes the pre-image and matches it with the pre-image with the recipient had shared with him. to ensure that the payment has been successfully delivered to its rightful recipient. Okay. But in this, what happens is that you need to wait for the recipient to generate an invoice. So if Alice wants to send a lightning payment to Bob, Alice will have to wait for Bob to generate an invoice, and then Bob will share that invoice, and only then can Alice initiate a transaction. Key send payments allow a sender to send payments over a lightning channel to a recipient without there being a need for the recipient to create an invoice. Okay. So the sender himself creates a pre-image, okay, and wraps that pre-image in an onion message, okay. And when the sender is routing that payment through multiple hops, people who are like intermediaries who are routing nodes only get information about where this payment has come from and where they have to send it. They do not see the pre-image, okay. So when they unwrap their layer, they don't see the pre-image till it reaches the final recipient, and when the final recipient unwraps its onion layer, it sees the pre-images and it recognizes that it does not have to forward the payment any further and the payment belongs to it. So key send payments are a mechanism through which you can a sender can send a payment to a recipient over the lightning channel without there being a need for the recipient to send an invoice beforehand. This support is added using blinded paths. We've discussed what blinded paths are in preceding sessions. NDK number 2419 adds the state machine for handling interactive transaction construction, a dependency for dual funded channels and splicing. We've discussed what dual funded channels are in detail in many of our sessions, and we've also discussed what splicing is in the preceding two sessions. Rust Bitcoin PR number 2549 makes various changes to the APIs for working with relative lock times. You know what relative lock times are, right? So yeah, Rust Bitcoin has made various changes to the APIs for working with relative time locks. The final one is BTC server PR number 5852 adds support for scanning BBQR animated QR codes. See newsletter 281. Newsletter 281 was the first newsletter that we did together at Bitshala. Since Raj stopped moderating it, it was like the first session that I ever moderated, and we covered this in detail in that newsletter. So, like, there's a limit to which the data a QR code can encode. Okay, so if you want to transmit information via QR code, which overflows the maximum amount of data that a QR code can encode, you use what is referred to as BBQR code. Okay, what's a BBQR code? BBQR code is synonymous to GIF. Okay, what is a GIF? A GIF it's not a video. It's a series of images that appear in sequence so quickly that you feel that it's a video. So basically, BBQR is a QR code, which is not one QR code. It's a sequence of QR code that appears so quickly one after the other that you appear that they're in motion, and you can scan them. Okay, to scan the entire information that is in the QR code. Let me just quickly see if we can see an image. 1 minute. Then we can highlight the session. I'll give a better understanding.
So is it just one of those moving QR codes, or is it some, art form that you can also see various shapes and things?
No, it's not an art form. It's this one. It's like this.
Right.
So this is not one QR code. These are subsequent QR codes that are moving in succession, because the amount of information that you want to encompass in a QR code is limited. You can't do that in one QR code. So you do this and you scan it for like maybe a few seconds till all the subsequent QR codes are flashed, and then the information is completely scanned by your device, your hardware device. So yeah, BTC server has added. Yep.
Yeah, I was just asking that, did you ever notice before watching this that there are those 8 blocks in the center of a QR code? It's like you can watch that they are static across moving QR codes.
8 blocks. Okay, let me see what you're talking about.
Quickly, yeah. It's like
okay,
in the middle,
1,
not
2,
8,
3, 4. No, there are 16, I think.
Yeah.
No, there
1,
are
2, 3, 4,
5,
16.
20.
Yes, 16.
20.
No, guys, let me count. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4.
5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20. Yes.
Okay, whatever, but some number. Yeah.
Actually, it's 21. 5 is 15 and 3 and 3 is 21. But yeah, anyways. So
no. In the bottom row there are 4, Saurabh. In the bottom row there are 4.
Oh God.
Top row there are 3. 4 and 3 is 7. 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 plus 5 is 17. 17 plus 5 is 23.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
So what's the significance, Jan?
So what is the significance of these, like this particular QR code over the simpler, uh, as in like HTLC?
Right.
This is an example of HTLC, right? What is this?
No, this is an example of QR code. Like BTC Pay Server is like a payment service provider. Okay, so you can use the QR codes to route Lightning payments. Okay, so if the data that you're encompassing is more, then that which can be incorporated in one QR code, you use BBQR instead of using 2 or 3 QR codes. Maybe it's a transaction that has a lot of data embedded, which cannot be incorporated in one QR code. So use these BBQRs. And I think I've seen them in Jade as well. I've seen them in Jade as well.
Yes, they are in JDS. I have seen them as well.
Yeah, so you have to scan them for a few seconds.
I do not understand the significance of them in Jade though. What data do you need multiple QR codes for in Jade?
I think that could be the case. I think every time that I try to, when you try to create a new wallet altogether, I think, okay, there is an option for you to create a wallet using only a QR code so that you never have to connect to the internet at all. At that time, like when I use Jade, it gives me an option to set up a wallet using a QR code, and that's when I've seen this moving QR code. So I think the information that is needed to set up a wallet from scratch is in that QR code. So Jatin, if you can hear us, you can stop this screaming and recording as well. And if like Mango, Shreya, and Saurabh have something to talk, then we can stay back for 5 minutes as we can wind off. But you can stop the stream.
Yeah, this was a very good, amazing session, Faisal. I mean, a lot of very interesting questions. I think there are so many open questions in all of them, especially with I can't seem to recall them in order, but one was the transaction fee rate versus absolute fee debate. One was the pre-SegWit node debate. I mean, so much of them are such evolving debates, right? There's no one answer, at least how I could think of them right now.
Right. True. So true. Okay, then anything else, Saurabh, Mango, or should we wind up?
It was good. Nothing else from my side. Thanks, guys.
Okay, Shan, then we'll wind up.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, guys.
And my notes, Saurabh, you and Jatin, if you all wanted for putting them in YouTube description, I've posted in the chat. So like one, if you can just copy that link and keep it with you if you want to.
All right. Cool. Works.
Okay. All right. Okay. Bye. Good night.